My name is Advocate Mohammed Abduroaf, and today's topic is the issue of domestic violence. I received an email from a lady specifically stating that her boyfriend has been sending her funny messages, insulting her, embarrassing her, and at the same time, in the past, he has also lifted his hand at her. So he was physically assaulted her. I never received much information regarding that, but she wanted to know what can she do to protect herself from this happening in the future. The long and the short of the matter is no one has a right to emotionally, physically, psychologically, or in any way abuse you, despite you being married to that person being your parent, your brother, your sister, your child. There is no right that that person has to perpetrate domestic violence on you. Today's video, in short, is to explain to you in a very layman's term what domestic violence is and what you can do to protect yourself from being a victim of domestic violence. In short, domestic violence relates to emotional, psychological, physical abuse, harassment, and various other types of abuse between people who are in a domestic relationship. That's very important to note. But the long and the short of it, it applies to husband and wife, girlfriend and boyfriend, even former relationships that the parties may have had. So your former fiance, your former boyfriend, your former partner, your former husband, and so on. It applies to all of those specific scenarios. There had to be a domestic relationship between you and that specific person. And once that has been determined, you as a person can approach the domestic violence court for assistance if you are a victim of domestic violence. Basically, what you do is you approach the domestic violence court in the area where you reside. It will be the magistrate's court closest to you, and as well where you work. That's also possible. You approach them with information, and I would advise you to write it down before the time as to why you require protection from the other party. So these are the two scenarios. Once you approach a domestic violence court and you complete the application form for an interim protection order, that's the first step. What the domestic violence court can do at that specific time. Remember, you're approaching the domestic violence court without notice to the other party. In my scenario, let's say, for example, your former spouse. You're approaching the domestic violence court stipulating that I am in danger or I am being harassed or I've been assaulted and I would like to protect myself from future forms of domestic violence against a specific person. You complete a document, you stipulate why the matter is urgent, the various incidents of domestic violence that took place, more recent ones, more ones that were far long ago. And if you require more space in your documentation, in your form, you can provide additional documentation, additional pages and complete it and so on. But that's your application, which will be looked at by a magistrate in his or her chambers in the office. And the magistrate will now peruse and look at your application and see, whether or not you require immediate protection from the other party. And if the magistrate can see, this is a serious matter, the other party is violating your rights as an individual for protection, the magistrate will grant an interim protection order with immediate effect, meaning that the magistrate will stipulate that the other party is not allowed to commit any forms of domestic violence as stipulated under the interim protection order. For example, he or she cannot emotionally, psychologically, and physically abuse you. If the other party does do that, he or she is in violation of the court order and they can have that person arrested immediately and brought to the court. So that's one scenario where we apply to the domestic violence court on serious allegations, or at least the domestic violence court magistrate believes the allegations are quite serious and they grant you an interim protection order. Now, on the interim protection order, there will be a return date, a date whereby you and the other party will have to reappear at court, where the court will listen to the other party's side. If the court, after looking at your application, says, this matter is serious, but I do not believe that it's so serious that I have to provide or grant an interim protection order. Maybe, for example, it could have been harassing emails, something that's not so serious that you need protection now, as opposed to assault, physical assault, verbal abuse, and so on. I'm just giving you a scenario to understand. But there is some form of domestic violence, but it can be resolved at a later date. Or you can block the person on WhatsApp, and that should resolve the matter at that specific point. That's the court's view. Then the court will grant a return date whereby they will not provide you with an interim protection order, but they'll provide you with a court date for you and the other party to appear back in the domestic violence court, and the matter can be resolved. And the last scenario would be the court says, I don't see any domestic violence here. I just see there's some issues between the parties, but no form of actual domestic violence. For argument's sake, I'm using a fictitious example. You were the one that went to your former partner's work. You were the one that called him out for doing A, B, C, and D, and then he shouted back at you and swore at you. For argument's sake, that's not allowed. But the court looks at it from a scenario whereby you were the one that caused this type of domestic violence, whereby he swore or shouted at you. And the court believes that, there's no merits under these circumstances because you caused the scenario. But that's my fictitious example, and each case is different. Once the parties appear before the magistrate together, both parties get an opportunity to state their case in a trial format, whereby the applicant will go on the witness stand and will testify. The affidavits previously presented can be used. Documentation, witnesses can be called, and so on. And the other party will get the same opportunity. There'll be cross-examination where parties can ask the other parties questions, etc. The court ultimately want to determine whether or not a final protection order should be granted, whether or not this person requires protection for the future, because domestic violence has occurred, and the question is, will it occur in the future? For argument's sake, let's say you approach the court on something that happened 5 years ago. You can do that, but for the last 4 years, you have not communicated with the other party. You aren't involved with the other party at all. Life went on. Now the court will say, but you do not require protection order because nothing happened for the last 4 years, and the court cannot see anything happening in the future. You have no children together. You live apart from each other. The last communication was 4 years ago, and there's no need to have communication. But there can be a different scenario whereby the domestic violence happened quite recently, and more than likely it will continue to happen because the parties are still living together, their children are together, they still have a relationship, or they are still involved with each other to a certain extent. Or despite them living separate lives, one party is still continuing to harass the other party. Under those circumstances, the court will say, you know what, I feel that this person requires protection. Here's a final protection order. Should the other party violate the protection order, the person can be arrested and brought to court. But remember, nothing will happen to you should there be a final protection order against you. So for argument's sake, should the one party have a protection order against him, he is not allowed or she is not allowed to commit domestic violence against the other party, but he or she doesn't do anything, just stays away and commits no domestic violence, or does not even communicate with the other side, nothing will ever happen to that specific person. But obviously, if they violate the protection order, there are serious consequences. Thank you.